This explainer examines Do Judges Behave Like Algorithms by Riya Manchanda, Chen, Chloe Zhu, Cynthia Rudin, Brandon Garrett, and Songman Kang. The purpose of this explainer is academic research and educational study.
All right, let's just dive straight into this graduate-level deconstruction. For our agenda today, we're going to hit the core inquiry, the lexicon and landscape, the analytical framework, the empirical truths, real-world applications, and finally, the conclusion.
So, starting with Section 1, the core inquiry, focusing on the judicial AI debate.
Mapping out the author's logic here, we're starting with a massive, highly debated problem, right? The use of artificial intelligence in our justice system. Critics are always saying algorithms are just way too rigid and they totally lack that nuanced empathy you get from a real human judge. But the authors saw a major gap in that logic and completely flipped the research question on its head. They asked, well, what if human judges already behave like algorithms? So, to actually test this out, they set up an investigation looking into a really high-volume, high-stakes environment, specifically misdemeanor bail hearings down in Harris County, Texas.
Moving on to Section 2, Lexicon and Landscape, exploring rules, standards, and Rashomon sets.
Now, before we look at the data, we really need to understand the long-standing legal tension the authors are digging into. In legal theory, making a decision usually falls into one of two buckets, rules and standards. Rules are super rigid. It's like a formula, right? If the defendant has X criminal history and Y age, then they get Z bail amount. Highly consistent, but zero flexibility. Standards, on the flip side, require actual, flexible, discretionary judgment. You're evaluating the unique, equitable circumstances of a specific, individual case. And the whole debate over AI, it's really just a modern reflection of this old-school debate. Do we want the cold consistency of algorithmic rules or the empathetic flexibility of human standards? To actually measure this, the authors bring in this incredibly fascinating technical concept called a Rashomon set. Put simply, instead of banging their heads against the wall trying to find one single, absolutely perfect mathematical equation to explain how a judge behaves, they instead look for a whole group of simple, equally good models. Specifically, they use decision trees that can all accurately predict a judge's logic. It's basically an academic acknowledgement that human reasoning is complex, and you can reach the exact same conclusion through several different, totally valid paths. Okay, Section 3, the analytical framework, looking at methodology and data. So, how did they pull this off? The authors used a seriously rigorous methodology to process their data. They didn't just grab raw numbers and run with them. They meticulously cleaned everything. They started out with a massive pool of over 500,000 case records from Harris County. By systematically filtering out the noise, duplicate cases, cases without actual bail hearings, or cases where there were pre-existing legal holds, they boiled it all down to a super clean data set of over 22,000 highly discretionary bail decisions made by 21 specific magistrate judges. And doing this ensures that the models are actually testing pure, unconstrained judicial decision-making.
Section 4, empirical truths, or mapping the judicial mind.
Now this is where it gets wild. What we're looking at is an actual interpretable decision tree generated straight from the Rashomon set for one specific magistrate, Judge 17. It shows this totally clear algorithmic logic. It's like a flowchart in their head. Does the defendant have an ICE hold? Yes or no? Were they charged with a new offense while already on release? Yes or no? And the authors discovered that for 17 out of those 21 judges, over 85% of their decisions could be perfectly captured by simple, shallow decision trees just exactly like this one. So the evidence is crystal clear here. Human judges absolutely do rely heavily on internal, implicit algorithms.
But what exactly goes into those mental algorithms? To find out, the researchers ran a variable importance analysis across all the successful models, and they found some pretty universal truths. For instance, literally every single judge factored in the defendant's age, and almost all of them factored in previous warrant counts. But beyond those basics, the algorithms wildly diverged from judge to judge. Some judges heavily weighted race or gender, while others didn't factor those in at all. So yeah, they act like algorithms for sure, but they absolutely do not use the same algorithms.
Now you might be wondering, what about the cases the models couldn't predict? Well, the authors found that between 2 and 33% of cases per judge were essentially unexplainable by any logical rule. But when the researchers actually rolled up their sleeves and manually dug into the physical court documents, they found that the primary culprit wasn't judicial randomness, it was just noisy data. We're talking about a clerk accidentally checking the wrong box on a form, or a judge verbally noting in the courtroom that the defendant was in custody in another county, a critical fact that was completely missing from the digital database. Furthermore, these forms prove something else really important.
When judges do deliberately break from their simple rules, they're usually applying those flexible standards we talked about earlier. For example, two different defendants might both be charged with misdemeanor family assault on paper, which would trigger the exact same algorithmic rule. But the qualitative intensity of the violence, which gets described verbally in the hearing but never makes it into the structured spreadsheet, that forces the judge to break their internal rule and apply a human standard.
On to Section 5, Real-World Applications, focusing on consistency and disagreement.
By extracting specific disagreement rules, the data proves something deeply profound about systemic fairness. Imagine a defendant is 24 or younger, facing an assault charge with 1 or 0 past warrants. Judge 4 and Judge 7 will literally disagree on their bail outcome 94% of the time. Let that sink in. The authors have empirically mapped out that systemic outcomes in this jurisdiction heavily depend on the completely arbitrary luck of which judge happens to get assigned to your case. To actually statistically verify this massive inconsistency, the authors designed what they call a triplet analysis. Basically, they took an anchor case from one judge, found an incredibly similar case handled by that very same judge, and then found a third incredibly similar case handled by a totally different judge. Setting it up this way allowed them to isolate whether the specific identity of the judge was the main deciding factor in the outcome.
And the results of this triplet analysis highlight a truly staggering paradox. A single judge will consistently follow their own internal implicit rules about 76% of the time. But if you compare how often two different judges agree on the exact same case facts, the alignment drops to roughly 55%. I mean, honestly, 55% is barely better than just flipping a coin.
Finally, Section 6, Conclusion. Let's reconstruct the final argument.
Tracing the full analytical arc on the board here, the authors started by asking if judges act like algorithms. They applied that Rashomon set methodology to thousands of meticulously cleaned cases. The evidence overwhelmingly proved that yes, judges rely heavily on implicit, highly predictable rules. But their analysis of inter-judge consistency proved that these implicit rules vary wildly from person to person. Therefore, they conclude that judicial arbitrariness isn't really about unpredictable human emotion. It's actually about competing completely undocumented human algorithms.
So what's the genuinely new main contribution to the field here? Well, rather than just rehashing the same old debate about human versus machine, this study empirically maps out the exact nature of human algorithmic inconsistency. It proves we don't just have a justice system made of judges, we effectively have a system of competing, invisible mathematical formulas.
Now, as for limitations, the authors fully acknowledge that their structured digital database simply cannot capture all the nuance of a spoken courtroom hearing, which definitely accounts for those leftover unexplainable cases. But, looking forward to future research, this framework absolutely paves the way for scholars to test whether these implicit judicial algorithms actually work. Like, do the specific mental rules Judge 4 uses prevent future crimes better than the rules Judge 7 uses? We just don't know yet.
All right, if you remember absolutely nothing else from this explainer, please internalize these 3 key takeaways. First, human judges operate largely on simple, interpretable rules. Second, when their decisions appear entirely unpredictable, it's usually just due to flawed or missing data. And third, true systemic fairness in the courts won't come from just blindly banning AI, but from understanding and actually aligning the completely disparate algorithms already running inside the minds of our judges. Ultimately, this study leaves us with an incredibly provocative question. If human judges already act like wildly inconsistent algorithms, shouldn't we be using clean, interpretable data models, not to replace them, but to hold a mirror up to their decisions and make human justice fundamentally fairer? Think about it.